Okay, so let's start. I will talk about scalar implicatures in child language, and I will also mainly focus on the processing capacity part. So speakers' intended meaning can go beyond the literal meaning of their utterances. You guys are very familiar with that. For example, suppose a mom pointing to a plate of cookies on the table and talk to her child, say, you can eat some of the look, there are some cookies. There are cookies on the table. You can eat some of the cookies. So the child was very happy, and he begins to eat. He will keep eating, and he eat them up. Now the mom will be angry. Because when the mom say you can eat some of the cookies, she may actually mean you can eat some, but not all of the cookies. So we call this like a scalar implicature. So many studies have shown that young children may have difficulties with scalar implicatures, especially scalar implicatures with those lexical scale, like the quantifier sum. So there are different accounts. Some studies will attribute children's difficulty to their grammar, to their linguistic knowledge, like they lack the knowledge of lexical scales. Later, I will talk about more about what is lexical scale I mean here. And or attribute to children's limited pragmatic knowledge. Another different count will attribute children's difficulty with scalar implicature to their limited processing capacities. So here I will mainly focus on the processing account. So it's suggested that the processing load of scalar implicatures is beyond children's processing capacities. So far, when the studies propose this kind of accounts, usually they didn't actually try to really examine the processing account. Usually acquisitionists, those group of acquisitionists, they usually propose this account as a possibility at the end of the paper or as a kind of like possibility in the discussion. So there are few evidence for this. And even there are some papers like Chen 2017, her dissertation, and Grinstead 2022. In their paper, they do want to see the correlation between children's working memory and children's scalar implicature computation, but their findings are mixed. So I will not talk in details about their findings, but if you are interested, we can talk about that at the question session. So anyway, the findings are mixed, and there are only very few studies about that. So I still wanted to look at the processing account to see. So here, I believe the acquisition scalar implicator is not like a nothing, all or nothing. It's not an all or nothing issue. So it's like I believe there is like semantics, pragmatics, like many things playing a role here. But I wanted to focus on the processing account to mainly look at whether the role of processing capacity will play a role here in children's performance of scalar implicature computation. So this is the outline. Later I will give more introduction of the background scalar implicature, and then I will move on to 4 different studies to examine the processing account. The last part will be the summary and open questions. So Horn in 1972 suggested that the quantifier sum and logical operator OR are scalar items. So they are part of a scale whose members are ordered according to their informativeness. For example, in 1, like the indefinite articles and existential quantifier sum and many, most, all, they are scale mids, and with the leftmost as the least informative and the rightmost as the most informative. And then disjunctive and conjunctive can form a scale together, with conjunctive being more informative here. Grass suggested that during a conversation, a speaker's contribution is assumed to be adequately but not overly informative. So suppose if one speaker uses a weaker term like the existential quantifier sum, then the listener would assume that the speaker has no enough evidence to say the stronger item. And if the listener take the speaker to be knowledgeable of the current context, they would infer that actually the stronger term is false. So when you say you can eat some of the cookies, when mom didn't use all, here maybe mom wanted to implicate you cannot eat all of the cookies. Okay? Scalar implicature can also arise from ad hoc scale based on the context. So for example, Mary asked, did you find the book and the pencil? John would John answered, I found the book. So John's answer may implicate he didn't find the pencil. So we call this ad hoc scales. So here give a brief a summarization. Under the standard grading account, the computation scale implicator can be demanding, a little bit complex because it can involve several steps at least. First, a listener needs to compute the literal meaning of a sentence containing the scalar item, and then generate the relevant scale like sum, all, and then generate the alternative synthesis by replacing the scalar item with the other member of the scale, and then restrict the alternatives by focusing on the more informative ones. Then the last step would be strengthen the original meaning by negating the more informative synthesis. So then the processing account would suggest those kind of steps. The computation is hard, it's demanding for children, it's beyond their processing capacities. Okay, so here, this project would like to examine the processing account from 3 different perspectives. So the processing account would predict that maybe children's processing capacity would reliably predict their scale implicator computation. And then second, adults under excess cognitive load would compute fewer scale implicator. They may perform more like children. And then the third one, with more cognitive resources available, children maybe improve their performance on scale implicator. Okay, now let's move on to experiment 1 and 2. I would like to check the working memory relation, the correlation between children's working memory and their scale implicator computation. So experiment 1, I focus on Mandarin-speaking children. So basically, it provides within subject data on both children's working memory and their scale implicator computation with the quantifier sum. So here I choose the working memory. It is a limited capacity system used to retain and process information over brief periods of time. I use the digit span test. It consists of both forward recalling span and also backward recalling digit span task. And then for the scale implicator, I use the cover box task. Later, I will give you one more example about that. Yes, this one. So the test sentence, so for example, cover box would always be, I give the children one test sentence, and then they choose a picture out of 3 pictures. So 2 of them are visible, but 1 is hidden. So I use X here to mean it's hidden, so children cannot see it. So one of the visible picture would be distractor, another visible picture would be target. If children accept the target, he can choose this one, but if they don't like neither of the visible picture, they can go to the hidden picture, which in their minds can be the correct one. Because in the training session, I will give the training to show the hidden picture sometimes can be the correct one. Okay, so there were 54 Mandarin-speaking children and 20 Mandarin-speaking adults. They are all monolingual native Mandarin speakers. The test sentence will always contain the quantifier sum, like Xiaohong ate some cookies. So yes, some, 一些. There are 3 different conditions: task condition, control condition, and filters. 6 items for each condition. For the test condition, here I use LU to represent it because the test sentence is logically true and pragmatically under-informative about the picture. So here I give you one example. Peppa Pig took some strawberries. So here I call this LU item because here Peppa Pig took actually all the strawberries. And here Peppa is a distractor because Peppa Pig didn't take any. Then the idea would be if you get the scale implicator, you may go to the hidden picture. So in the hidden picture, Peppa Pig can take some, but not all the strawberry. Later, we will talk about the results by children and adults. And then for the control condition, logically true and pragmatically informative, I will use Li to represent it. So Peppa Pig took some balls. So here, Peppa Pig took some, but not all the balls. I use this as a control condition because, because later I will show some children actually fill this condition. Some children do not choose this one, they choose the hidden picture. When asked why, they say, because there are some left. Like the Peppa Pig didn't take all of them, or say there are 3 left here. So it seems like they want the Peppa Pig to tick all the boxes. I'm not sure it's because like they have like different understanding of the quantifier sum, or because of the task, they want the Peppa Pig to be perfect. So yeah. So I use this condition as a control, because if they choose this one because they interpret sum as all actually, then it will be hard for me to interpret their behavior for scalar implicature. So I would exclude them for now, for the current data. So for feeders, there are no quantifier and no scalar implicator. We'll just say Peppa Pig took cookies. And then like one destructor, Peppa Pig took oranges, one is like took cookies. So I will now manipulate the amount, the quantity of the reference. So those experiments are all lab-based and are tested online. Yeah, so as I mentioned, all the adults passed the inclusion-exclusion criteria. I use the control condition and feeders, both control condition and feeders as the exclusion criteria. But then 9 children failed the control condition. So this seems to interpret some as all in the study. You can see it's not like all young children, like a 1 6-year and a 1 7-year do that. So yeah, like it's confusing. Yes, we can talk about that later. Let's move on to the results. So now let's look at the picture. So this figure shows acceptance rate of visible all scenario. So do you remember like when Peppa Pig took all the strawberries, whether participants will choose it or not? For the sentence, Peppa Pig took some strawberries. If you choose the visible all scenario, means like you didn't get the scalar implicator. If you don't choose it, go to the hidden picture, we suppose you get the scalar implicator here. So here you can see children accept the visible all scenario pretty frequently, like 72%, but then adults only do that 5% here. So these are compatible with previous study to say like young children don't get scalar implicator at an adult-like level. But then we wanted to look at their digit span. So these are the average digit span for adults and children. So you can see children and adults do similar for the forward recalling digit span. So they can do forward recalling digit span test. It's much easier for children. They can do it pretty well. But then for the backward recalling digit span, children find it much harder. So like they can only do like average 2.4. Yeah. So some children, young children, they can do 2, like they can switch the order, but then like 3, it will be very hard for them. The important thing, like we wanted to look at the correlation between them to see whether children's working memory or digit span would be correlated with their scalar implicator computation. So here, the x-axis represents forward recalling digit span, and the y-axis means the acceptance of the all scenario. So you can see when you have longer forward recalling digit span, they may accept less of the visible scenario. Visible all scenario means they get more scalar implicator. So there is significant correlation between forward recalling digit span and their scalar implicator computation. And then this is the backward recalling digit span. We also found significant correlation here. Then because as you remember, so at the beginning, so the children, the age range is really wide. So it's like 4 to 7 years old. So here I wanted to partial out to the age effect because sometimes it just means maybe age because but when we talk about age effect can mean many things, right? I mean the cognitive abilities or linguistics abilities, many different things. But anyway, here when we partial out to the age effect, the effect of forward recalling digit span disappears, but then the backward recalling digit span remains significant. So we still find the significant correlation between backward recalling digit span and scalar implicator computation. Okay, so the summarization would be summary of the experiment 1 would be children do not compute scalar implicator at an adult-like level, at least in this specific study, cover box study, and then their computation rates of scalar implicator are correlated with their working memory, as indicated by their backward digit span. And then experiment 2, sorry,
just a quick question. I'm trying to wrestle with the question whether this is a scalar question or a scope question. So I could imagine my 4-year-old saying, well, it's not all the strawberries in the world, so it's some strawberries. Is there anything in the experiment that would help me choose between those two options?
Oh, you mean the scope of the reference?
The comparison.
Yes, yes, okay. So that's a good idea. So good question. I think maybe the distractor usually show them the scope of the reference rather than like all the strawberries in the world. So like all the distractor would show like there are like 6 or 5 reference there, and Peppa Pig like sometimes took some 3 here, sometimes took all the 6 or 5. So I so far I didn't think like there are yeah. So from the children's justification, sometimes when they choose this one, and then when they choose this one, yeah, I didn't like from their because sometimes like why Peppa Pig is right, why Peppa Pig is wrong. I didn't like hear anything mentioned like, oh, because like they just took some strawberries of the world or something.
Okay.
Yes, yes. But that's a good question. We need to restrain their focus.
There is still a conventionality to presenting stuff in a square and saying this is the universe you should think about.
Yes.
You know, and they have to get that before they can say, oh yeah, that's the only universe they need to consider for this.
Yes, yes. Great, great. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. So then move on to experiment 2. Basically exactly the same experiment as experiment 1, but we move it to English-speaking children. So here we have 40 English-speaking children, again 4 to 7 years old, and 20 Mandarin English-speaking adults. So here's the results. Again, children did not get the scalar implicator law. They choose the visible all scenario, like Peppa Pig took all the strawberries. But the adults like rejected like more frequently. But here you may see like adults is like 21%, but Mandarin speaking adults are like 5%. There's a little bit difference here. We can talk about that maybe in the question time. So, but anyway, there is like a significant group difference here. And then for the working memory, again, forward recalling digit span is easier for children. Although you can see maybe compared to Mandarin speaking children, these English speaking children have shorter forward recalling digit span. There are different reasons for that. Some paper may suggest because like a cultural education thing, like maybe Mandarin speaking parents like try to teach the children to recite the digit sequence like from early on, or there are studies show like Mandarin pronunciation of the different numbers is shorter than English pronunciation, so will be easier for children to recall. And another factor I wanted to mention here, so do you remember in experiment 1 we have 54 Mandarin speaking children, and here we only have 40 English speaking children, and those 40 mainly the average like the age range is like from the younger group a little bit. So that may contribute to the difference here. And then again, the backward recalling digit span, they didn't do very well for the children, so it's like around 2. Again, we wanted to look at the correlation between working memory and also scalar implicator. So this time we didn't find any significant correlation between scalar implicator computation and their forward recalling digit span. But we found significant correlation for the backward recalling digit span. And again, we partial out to the age effect, and the backward recalling digit span effect remains significant here. Okay, so, and since like the English-speaking children, the sample size is only 4, and there is a wide age range, so I try to combine the both children, English-speaking children and Mandarin-speaking children together, because we don't think there is significant cross-linguistic difference here. And then we combine the data sets together, use the language as an additional predictor. It shows that we still find significant effect of the backward recalling digit span, and no significant effect for the function for the forward recalling digit span and also their age. Okay, so experiment 1, experiment 2 together, like wanted to show there is direct evidence to show there is a significant correlation between children's scalar implicator computation and their working memory. Provide kind of support to the processing account. Now I would like to move on to experiment 3, the memory loss study. Because for experiment 3, we wanted to study from a different perspective. Will adults perform differently? Will adults perform more like children when they have more cognitive load? When they are under more cognitive load? So here I used the dual task paradigm. So for the sentence picture verification task and data recalling task. Data recalling task as a secondary task would be kind of parallel to the experiment 1, experiment 2. So we use data span to expose the adults under more memory load. So I tested 102 Mandarin speaking adults because there are 2 different skill types. Do you remember at the beginning part we talked about ad hoc skill? When Mary asked John, did you find the book and the pencil? John answered, like, I found the book. So I include both counter skill and ad hoc skills here together, and to see how different skill type will perform differently here. And here is all the 6 different conditions. True control. True control would be Peppa Pig took some strawberries, Peppa Pig took some, but not all the strawberries. Again here, that's related to a question. I will, because actually before each picture, this picture, there will be always another leading picture. Say, look, there are strawberries on the table. Then Peppa Pig have a basket which is empty, and standing here, there are strawberries on the table. And then second picture sentence would be Peppa Pig took some strawberries. Yes, I put there because I wanted to. I realized there may be a possibility people think the strawberries in the world. So then this is true control. Peppa Pig took some, but not all strawberries. And then false control. Peppa Pig only took 1 strawberry. And then critical condition would be Peppa Pig took all the strawberries, whether it's true. Then the ad hoc scale here, I say, look, there are fruits on the table. There are fruits on the table. Peppa Pig took the apple. So in the true control, Peppa Pig only took the apple, not other thing. But then the false control would be Peppa Pig took the banana, but not apple. Then the critical condition would be Peppa Pig took both the apple and the banana. Then is it correct to say Peppa Pig took the apple? Right? If you get the scalar implicature, you may think it's not so accurate because Peppa Pig also took the banana, right? So these are the 6 different conditions. And then I have the different memory load condition, a low condition and a high load condition. For the low condition, participants will see 3 consecutive digits, like a 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, 9. It will be very easy. Once you remember the first digits, you will know the following 2. So we think the low memory load will just expose at very low memory load on the participants. And the 3-digit sequence will be presented for 3 seconds. And then the high memory load condition, participants will see 6-digit non-consecutive sequences like 3, 1, 7, 5, 2, 9 for 3 seconds. So will be kind of challenging, kind of like difficult for them. They have to pay a lot of attention to that. Okay? So between subject design, one participant will only see 1 type of memory load condition. I did this test with Qualtrics. So only 1 participant was excluded because that participant accepted this for some. Make me like, did Mandarin, because those are for Mandarin speaking adults. I was like, does Mandarin allow that? But I really, so I don't think it allows the singular reading here. But okay. So that's the result. First, I wanted to look at their digit recalling accuracy. So you can see both for low condition, high memory load condition, participants do the digit recalling pretty well. It means like they do pay attention to the secondary task. They are not like try to treat out the 2 tasks. And I try to see whether their scalar implicature computation rate, whether correlated with their accuracy of digit recalling, whether they try to treat out the 2 performance. There is no significant correlation here. So that's good. Now let's move on to their scalar implicature computation. So in the low condition, they compute scalar implicature 60%, but then in the high low condition, they decrease 35%. So it seems like the high memory load condition did influence their performance on scalar implicature and make it like they compute fewer scalar implicatures here. But then we wanted to see whether the memory load will have any effect on their general performance, not only for scalar implicature, but also for true control and false control. So we did not see any influence on their true control and the false control condition. So it means those memory loads only interfere their scalar implicature computation rather than their other literal interpretation here. And then that's the response time. So I mirror their response time on the web page. So this is the response time because there are many different theories about scalar implicature. Some suggest that maybe participants will take a longer time to get scalar implicature than their literal meaning. So I wanted to see their response time, whether they have any difference here, but I didn't see any significant difference here. And so participants didn't take a longer time in generally high-low condition, or they did not take a longer time like for the pragmatic response, like the scalar implicature. Although here in the low conditions a little bit longer, but it's not significant, and also you can see in the high-low condition the scalar implicature computation is not even longer than the literal interpretation here. Okay, and yeah. Then let's move on to the ad hoc scale. So for ad hoc scale, when I give them the two different memory load conditions, I didn't see any effect here. So they keep doing it pretty well, like around 17%, and then in high memory load conditions, like 67%. So there is no significant difference here. There is no memory load effect here. And then when I check their response time, again, I didn't see any interesting response time difference here. So the scalar implicature did not take longer time than semantic reading, and also the high memory load did not make participant take longer time. Okay, so discussion. So memory load study here, we found memory load effect on the computation rate of scalar implicature with the quantifier scale, the sum, but not for ad hoc. But then for the memory load effect for the quantifier scale, it cannot provide support for the processing account. Say the scalar implicature associated with the quantifier scale is demanding and beyond children's processing capacity, because when you give adults more memory loads, they will perform maybe more like children. But then the question would be why we don't find any memory load effect on the computation rate of scalar implicature with ad hoc scales. One possibility here would be scalar implicature with ad hoc scale may involve less cognitive cost than scalar implicature with lexical scale. So the high memory load condition is not demanding enough for participants to derive any effect here. Actually, we can find some evidence from acquisition part, because there are studies show that children younger than 5 years old, they can do scalar implicature with ad hoc scale easily, but not with lexical scale. So maybe the early success by children will also show ad hoc scale maybe have less cognitive cost here. Okay, so that's my third experiment. Now I would move on to the last one. So last one, we wanted to see whether with more cognitive resources available, will children compute more scalar implicature. So how should I do that? The one perspective I choose is to facilitate children's retrieval of alternative expression. So if the alternative expression, like the universal quantifier all, is provided by the context, children they do not need to retrieve alternative expression from the mental lexicon, and the processing load scalar implicature may be reduced, and then children's performance may improve. So we don't know. Let's see whether it will work. So here I tested 163 5 to 8 years old Mandarin-speaking children, and because I have 3 different conditions. So here, okay, I use priming. So no priming means no alternative expression presented in the context. Subject priming means I present the alternative expression in the subject position. Later I will tell why I have subject-object, 2 different situation here. So anyway, I have 3 different conditions, and each group will have around 50 children. Those are Mandarin-speaking children. And then again, we use cover box task. But then this time, we do not only provide one sentence and choose a picture, we provide a context story for each sentence. So in that case, we wanted to manipulate the presence of the alternative in the context story. Okay, so yeah. Let me explain why I would like to have the subject and object condition here. So Pouscoulous and Papafrago at UPenn, they suggested that children's difficulties with scalar implicature is due to children's difficulties with identifying the relevant alternative in a specific context. So it's not because children do not know the knowledge of scalar implicature or they do not have enough processing capacities, but because they have difficulties in identifying which alternative is relevant in this case. So that's why they will have difficulties in scalar implicature computation. So then they suggested that when you focus on the quantity of the reference modified by the scalar item, they will enhance the relevance of the alternative. For example, if I say Papa picked 2 some strawberries, then if in the context story I focus on the quantity of the strawberries, they will make the alternative all will be more relevant here. It will be easier for them to get scalar implication. Then in my study, all the quantifier will be in the object position. Papa Pig planted some flowers. Then in the context story, like in the subject priming, here I say, then in the context story, I will always say the little friends want to help plant these flowers and these trees. If I put the alternative expression, like all the trees and all the flowers, I'm afraid they will focus on the quantity of the reference. Although it's not like I did not mention tree in the test sentence, but still I focus on all the trees, all the flowers in the context, then it will focus on the quantity. So here, in order to exclude those kind of confounding factor, I include 2 different conditions. One condition is like subject priming, so I put the alternative all in the subject position. So all the little friends want to plant these trees and these flowers. So I do not focus on the quantity of the reference of the object, but focus on the subjects here. So to see whether the 2 conditions will have different effects. So the key prediction of the processing account would be see the subject condition should have some felicitation effect here. Okay, so now let's move on to the data for the 5 to 8 years old. When I combine them together, this is the no priming condition. So here I wanted to mention the priming maybe is like a big term. So I thought I deleted this term, but I realized like they are still here like in the table. So no priming means there's no alternative expression. Subject priming, like I put the alternative in subject. Object priming is like in the object. So you can see there's no difference across the 3 conditions. I did not see significant improvement. But then, as I said before, these are 5 to 8 years old, so like a big age range. So I wanted to see how the different age group perform here. So I divide them to 4 different age groups, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. So here's the data. So for 5 years old, I didn't see any improvement, and they didn't get scalar implicator at all. So you can see maybe it's wrong direction. Like for the object priming, it's like they do worse or something. I want to mention this is only noise. There is no significant difference here. Because for the, I think the 8% here, for the no priming condition is mainly because there's 1 or 2 child do pretty well, 5-year-old. They just get to scalar implicator. They're awesome. So yeah. Then for the 6 years old, they do a little bit better than 5 years old, but still there's no significant correlation, significant difference between them. And then for 7 years old, they show interesting pattern. So you can see like they do better in subject condition, and then much better in the object condition. There is like a difference between no priming, subject priming, and object priming. There is a significant difference. Okay. And then for the 8 years old, no difference again, but they do pretty well. They just get to scalar implicator. So it seems like the 7 years old show subject priming and object priming, and stronger object priming because we think object priming not only have priming effect, but also have the enhanced relevancy effect here. Okay. But then why is the priming effect absent for or the facilitation effect absent for the 5 or 6 years old? There are at least 2 possibilities. Maybe they still lack the relevant linguistic knowledge, like the lexical skill, as we talked about before, or they just indicate 5 or 7 years old have more limited processing capacities. Like the facilitation effect here is not enough for them to get to scalar implicature. When you just present the alternative in the context, it's not helpful enough for them. So in order to answer this question, I went back to experiment 1 to see whether the 5 years old and 6 years old in that study showed a significant correlation with the working memory and the scalar implicature computation. So I did not find any significant correlation there for 5 years old, but then I found significant correlation for 6 years old. So maybe the two age group do not have any facilitation effect here due to different reasons. Maybe 5 years old just not only have limited processing capacities, but also have very limited linguistic knowledge to help them. And then for 6 years old, they may have the relevant knowledge in place, but their processing capacities are more limited than 7 years old. So here, the facilitation is not strong enough for them to get it. So, okay, summarization of all the studies. So this project aims to examine the processing account from 3 different perspectives. So the first, whether children computation scalar implicature is closely related to their processing capacities, whether adults under a high memory load will compute fewer scalar implicatures, and whether children can compute more scalar implicatures when more cognitive resources are available. And the different studies find kind of like supporting for the processing account. There are some still open questions. Like first, when we see there are correlation between children's working memory and their scalar implicature computation, the question would be, is there any precise minimum threshold for working memory in order to be able to compute scalar implicatures? I think Shannon before mentioned a very good point. Maybe it's maybe digit span like 5 or 4, like 5. Because so far the children who can do scalar implicature and who show digit span, backward recalling digit span for 5, is very limited, very small sample size. So I cannot determine whether this working memory level is a threshold or not. But maybe like in the future when you expand the data sample size to more children who can do the scalar implicature and who can get the working memory level higher, maybe we can find such a thing. But I don't know whether there is such a thing or not. And also, which steps of scalar implicatures are demanding or costly for children if we think scalar implicature is hard? So the facilitation study, the experiment 4, we talk about maybe show that the retrieval of alternative can be hard for children. Because we say when we present the alternative in the context, you can help it. But still, do you remember that 6 years old do not show any effect, right? Do not show any improvement there. And also, for 7 years old, they show improvement, but it's only certain level, a very small level, right? Like improved to around 40%, but not even above the 50%, right? So it seems like there are more things there, or it's like maybe not only retrieval of alternatives is hard, also maybe because the negation part is hard. So maybe there are more steps there need help. And then maybe like cross-linguistic research will be very important to check the processing account, because processing account maybe predict like we can find similar effect with regardless of the cross-linguistic like differences. Yeah, so that's the open questions I have here. That's all of my presentation. Thank you all. Yeah. Let me know if you have any questions. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Jane, and I actually do kind of similar work, so I know this is an annoying question because people have asked me the same question. But could you talk a little bit more about the kind of precise relationship you think is going on between like processing abilities and the scalar implicature? Because I completely buy your idea that, well, this is hard and this is also hard, so they might go together as I get better at the things, but that's extremely vague. So I was just wondering if you have a more precise story to tell.
You mean working memory and scalar implicature, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I think that's a good question. Here, like the working memory, I choose the digit span. Maybe let me start to talk about the digit span and scalar implicature maybe.
Sure.
And as I checked like both forward recalling digit span, backward recalling digit span. I didn't find any forward recalling digit span effect here. Then for backward recalling, then I tried to think why backward recalling digit span will work here, but forward recalling does not work. But then I think maybe it makes sense because for forward recalling digit span, you just listen to the digits and recall it, done. But then for backward recalling digit span, maybe more similar to scalar implicature computation. You need to memorize all the skill myths like together, and then try to keep them active in your working memory, and to manipulate the order, and then to switch each one compared to each one's order. Then it's like a skill implicator, maybe you need to memorize like the skill myths and compare their informativeness and try to negate them. So I think maybe the steps involved will be kind of similar but not same. So that's why maybe use the digit span, you can find the working memory. Then maybe let's go back to the background study. Let's show like some studies try to look at the correlation between working memory and skill implicator. Some find the effect, some did not find effect. Maybe really then, because when you see like when they try to look at working memory and skill implicator, people choose different studies. So like the dot memory task or the viral memory. So it seems like the memory task you choose will also have effect here. Then it's like why? Because maybe the different memory tasks, like they involve maybe more similar steps as skill implicator, but some like more like forward recalling digit span it's not so similar to scalar implicator computation. So my answer would be I do not have very clear or accurate answer for that, but it seems like the digit span here, like it seems like the computation involved kind of like maybe related or similar to the scalar implicator.
Very cool, thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Hi.
Oh, yeah, I wanted to ask something about the setup in experiment 4. So when you gave us examples of subject priming and object priming, the examples you gave also seem to have some specific semantic content, right? So it was that the subject priming was something in your examples like all the little friends, whereas in the object priming case it was all the trees and flowers seem to be the target for the implicature. And so what I was wondering about, is this really about subjects versus objects, or is it about the semantic content of the restrictor on the quantifier?
Okay, good. So I think that's the point. Like, I wanted to distinguish the subject-object. Maybe subject-object is too superficial label here. Doesn't really mean anything. So I use a label here because I think because for my study, like all the test sentence, the quantifier would be the trees and flowers, right? And then the object here, but you are right, for object here, you will focus on the reference there. But then all the little friends here, like, it doesn't matter to the trees or flowers, right? So here, then the idea would be maybe the processing, like when you only present the alternative here, rather than really focus on the quantity of the reference, can you really be helpful?
I guess there is a question that just popped into my head. So one thing about this is, to what extent is if we're presenting alternatives, to what extent are we just presenting lexical alternatives in the sense of different quantifiers, and to what extent are we presenting quantified noun phrases, right? And so I'm not sure if that's relevant, but it did strike me that it might be that getting the quantified noun phrase, all the trees, would be really a different kind of effect for the processing situation. Anyway,
yes.
Thought, but
Yes. Thank you. So yeah, I think that makes sense. And also, I do not have like a very clear answer for your question, but it make me think of like another question I encountered before. Is like some people think like ad hoc skill. When you say children are okay with ad hoc skill but difficult with lexical skill, maybe it's possible like for ad hoc skill, so far the study will always use nouns. Like say, my friend has glasses, but then you show another picture, friend has a hat and glasses. Or let's say Peppa Pig took a strawberry, and then Peppa Pig took an apple or banana, it's only like a noun phrases here. But then for the quantifier is not noun phrase, it's like a modifier to the noun phrase. So even the status in the sentence will be different. So then for the ad hoc skill, those studies, like the nouns will be more clear or explicit to the children, the contrast. But then to the modifier will be a little bit different. So yeah, so I think those questions maybe correlated, and we need to know like what's going on there. Make children can do better, and what make children cannot do that, right? Thank you. Yep.
Sort of a question going back to the point about domain restriction.
Yeah.
And identifying, like what's the relevant set of strawberries here? And I mean, at least like and actually I'm interested in this if this is a point of variation. At least in English, you can say some strawberries, but you can also use the partitive some of the strawberries.
Yeah.
And I know some work in scale implicature has looked at that contrast, though I can't remember that work. It's been a few years. So I'm wondering both about the motivation in using some and not some of in the English, and whether you have a similar like partitive construction available in Mandarin, and if so, if you would predict performance to be different with that additional cue where the definite, at least in the English, some of the strawberries, the definite gives you the domain restriction.
That's
kind of
true.
for free.
That's true. That's true. That's a good point. Thank you. Yes. Yeah. So here, you're right. Like there are studies to see like the partitive construction, like in English, may be helpful for the scalar implicature computation. But if I can recall correctly, I think the studies, the findings are kind of like mixed. Some think like it's helpful, but then people try to replicate it. They say, oh, there's no difference there. So here I did not choose partitive because I'm afraid the partitive will give some facilitation here. I just use the plain construction here. And then you're right, that's a good point. Like when you use the definite article there, it will give you the restriction of the scope. That's a great point. Thank you. Yeah.
As a follow-up, I had the same question
Yeah.
written down. I was wondering, because in your priming, you can't say all trees and flowers, right? You have to say all the trees and
Yes,
flowers.
yes,
So,
yes, yes.
I was just wondering if that was also...
And also in the study, I show picture together with those sentences, and because like I will show picture, there are flowers and trees on the floor. Like there are 5 or 6 flowers here, 5 or 6 trees here. Say plant all the trees and all the flowers. So basically give them like the scope of the reference. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe I missed something. So if Peppa Pig takes some strawberries,
Yeah.
the only thing that keeps her from having all the strawberries is that you can see the table where they're all disappeared from.
Yeah.
But she can have some strawberries with no external reference environment, right? There's none, there's one, there's more than one, which I think is some,
Yeah.
and then she can't take all unless you know what she's pulling from,
Yes.
and she can't take some instead of all unless you know what she's pulling from.
Yes. Yes. So then for this study specifically, before this picture, they will always see another leading picture. There are 5 strawberries on the table, and say, look, there are strawberries on the table. Then next picture, Peppa Pig have 3 in the basket, because first one, Peppa Pig will have empty basket standing here with 5 strawberries on the table. And then the second page will show Peppa Pig has 3 strawberries here, and say, Peppa Pig took some strawberries. So I
mean, I think that the point I'm trying to make is that this is actually a sort of subtlety that the kids have to absorb before they can answer your question.
Yes.
The way that you're hoping you answer the question you're hoping to ask them.
Yes.
So
Yes.
I know that there's lots of times when people giving kids cognitive tests and they'll interpret it in one way that's perfectly sensible, but not what the instructor asked them.
Yes.
So
Yes.
Like I'm just it could be that they just get a finer and finer gradient I don't know why that would be that well correlated with the working memory, but it might be for some other reason.
Yes, yes. So it might be like related to their pragmatic, like their knowledge. They can focus on the details of the context, or they can focus on the expectation of the experimenter. Like I want you to focus on those group rather than all the random like reference.
Right.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Oh.
I wanted to ask about this slide in particular, because I was thinking about the false control case where Peppa Pig takes 1 strawberry.
Yeah.
And so just wanted to clarify, so this was done for Mandarin speakers,
Yes,
right?
yes, yes.
Because I was thinking for English this is a little bit messy, right?
Yeah.
Because the standard semantic says some means at least one,
Yeah.
except it's plural marked. And so we seem to prefer two or more.
Yes.
But I would think that at least in some circumstances, you'd accept at least one as true, right? So even though I kind of think in the particular scenario you have on that drawing, it seems weird to say it's true.
Yeah.
But like imagine, so you ask, so the instruction was, Peppa Pig was told that she has to take some strawberries. Did she?
Even with the plural marker, you think this one's okay?
I was trying to do a slightly different version where it sounded better.
Okay.
It does sound odd to me with the plural marking, but I'm worried about whether this is about the quantifier.
Okay,
and
I see.
somehow it enters into a scale.
I see.
Or just something about the plurals. And so also that made me wonder if Mandarin is just different on this.
Okay. Yeah. So I think Kristen has some
so
comment.
Semantically,
Yeah.
one or more is accurate, so that's not a semantically false control.
Oh.
And in fact, under some accounts, like A times X, the plural gives rise to an implicature calculation itself, that there'd be a plurality.
I see. Yeah.
So she did take some strawberries in that top middle scenario. And if you think that that's false, you're calculating the implicature that the plural indicates a plurality.
I see. I see. Maybe that's why that adults didn't do it correctly.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. That's great data that reinforce that.
Yeah. Maybe I should change the false control to like they didn't take anything actually, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be like more clear for the participant. Yeah. Okay, good to know that. Yeah.
I think I asked a version of this at your search talk, but it came to mind again because some of this was a bit different. It was really wonderful at the end, like seeing these different factors that could come into play. For instance, lexical knowledge, actually knowing the scale is one matter and could still be relevant, but then on top of that, you have this working memory loads. Something else I was thinking about, especially in acquisition, is at least several theories present scale implicature as something like this automatized procedure, right? Like you are calculating it on the fly, but you do it automatically. You don't have to. You're not reasoning about people's intentions. It's just something you do. But we know the procedures take time, so I'm just wondering how that. If you see that as potentially fitting in with understanding some of the littlest kids, like 5-year-olds, if it can be a matter, of that knowing the scale, knowing that sum and all are both quantifiers, that's one explanation. Another is that there's an actual procedure that has to be extracted from all of these, exchanges.
Yes.
And they just haven't done that step yet. There's
Yes.
a procedure that's missing, not the scale itself.
Yes.
So I'm wondering if you thought at all about that, if there's any way that we could adjudicate between those, if this is even a well-formed question that I'm asking, I don't know.
I think maybe David Bonner at San Diego, their researchers basically say for those young children, actually they know some, they know all, but they just need extra learning step to know some and all form a scale together before they can really get to scale implicature. So their study basically suggests this case, but I remember in their paper what they do is basically compare the lexical scale and ad hoc scale to show children can do ad hoc scale better than lexical scale, because for lexical scale you need to really build the scale together with the two different quantifiers, but then for ad hoc you can build up the scale from the context. You do not really need your previous linguistic knowledge to do that.
So the argument there is it really is about the scale and constructing the scale, not what you do with the scale once you have it.
Yes.
But that also is assuming that the way that we're computing ad hoc and lexical implicatures is the same. But the adult data might suggest otherwise based on what you've shown us with the working memory impact on ad hoc versus lexical.
Yes.
So I guess this is another question I have is relating to this is what, and going back to what Jane asked too, is what do we think the underlying procedure actually is that working memory load is going to impact implicature in some context, particularly lexical, but not in these ad hoc cases.
Yeah, so you're right. So basically they think ad hoc scale and lexical scale maybe have similar procedure, but then for the lexical scale more difficult, they need to know the lexical scale before they can do that. But then for ad hoc scale, they can build up the scale out of the context. So then for the memory load study, like for the high memory load for the adults, I did not find significant effect for the high memory load. So my idea would be, I'm thinking one possibility, I'm not sure it makes sense or not. One possibility would be, although they have similar procedure, but the involved cognitive cost will be different. So when you, even for adults, when you try to compute the skill implicator with lexical scale, you still, yeah, let's leave the optimized procedure aside. So if we don't think of that, so you think you need to retrieve the alternative like from your mental lexicon to compare everything. So they think those may be harder than the actual scale. You just see the information very clearly in the context and do that. So that's a possibility. But then your point, you're correct. I know like there are some studies for adults. They show some adults can do it very quick, very soon. Even like they think even for them like they are the skill implicator kind of default rather than the literal meaning. So, and then there are some paper, I cannot remember the author, they suggest actually skill implicator, the development of skill implicator, it's not like a literal meaning skill implicator. There's like a literal meaning skill implicator, a third step like make a skill implicator as a default, like optimized. Then for them, like they can do pretty quick. But then I think the paper would basically suggest for the third step, it's not everyone can do that. It's like there are individual differences here. Some people do it pretty quick, and then some people still need extra processing there. But then that's the question. So for those who can do very quick, it's like a really default, or it's just that they can do it like skip it very fast. Because as I remember for the memory load study, there are studies also show people who have better working memory, they will have less working memory load effect here. So they will not be affected by the secondary test. If they have a lower working memory, if their working memory was memorized before, they have lower working memory, then it's very likely they will be affected by the extra task here. So I think there are individual differences here. So yeah, complex question. I don't know. There are tons of questions need to be answered.